One of the things that particularly now, because there's just so much data that we deal with, is consider options for either like caching some of the data, like even locally on the machine that's doing the scraping, or some sort of, like if you're doing lookups on a regular basis, then, maybe you want to cache those so you minimize the calls. And maybe you need to do something where you regularly refresh that lookup, but you're still storing it, locally or in memory, or maybe even into a local data store or out to a file that just eliminates your need to go hit that website or that API or that RSS feed yet again. And you may run into situations like API calls in particular. It is becoming, common enough that one, there is a limit to the number of calls you can make, either, per month, sometimes per day, sometimes per hour. And you may have to look, particularly in your initial like data loading processes. It may be something where you may have to run for days to get all of the data that you want to get your initial setup going. So you may have to look at ways to do some sort of accounts or time delays or something like that. So that if there's if example, they say you can only make 1,000 calls per hour, then you're going to have something in there that has a little timer and has a count of calls and says, okay, I've made, and maybe you can make those pretty quick, but maybe it's something where you say, oh, I've hit my limit. So now I'm going to give it, a certain amount I'm going to give it an hour, and then I'm going to go kick it off again. Or I hit my limit, but now, I know that I hit that limit over a 30-minute period. So 35 minutes from now, I can start pulling those again. Or I build a time delay so that I always do, I can't do more than 1,000. So I have timers in there that's little sleep timers or something like that, that guarantees that I will never get more than, 999 calls in an hour or something along those lines. So you may have to do some delays or other little tricks to avoid hitting limits. Sometimes it's just a matter of you're going to have to do the call, and then you have to go to sleep for, have the system go to sleep for 5 minutes, then do the call again. So that it doesn't look like so you don't crush the system, but also, maybe so you don't get flagged as a super high traffic site. Another thing you can do is look at timestamps and update dates and things like that, so that you can store when you made your last call. And then the next time you make the call, put a parameter in there, or, provide a parameter, assuming that they allow for that functionality, that says, well, I only want data that's changed since the last time I made the call. That makes maybe, the first time you ever do it, maybe that's an expensive call, but from then on, it's only going to take deltas, and therefore maybe is something a little more, reasonable to work with. So what have we hopefully learned in this? One is that scraping can come in many forms. When you see, or receive a request to scrape data, realize that may not be actual web scraping. You may be able to do that through like an API or RSS feeds, or another thing that I didn't really specifically get into, because it's sort of a combination of it's really like a web scrape-ish kind of thing. Sometimes you can just do automation that goes in, logs into a site, goes out to some report link, generates that report, saves that file, and then you have that file, whether it's XML, JSON, CSV, and you actually instead are parsing, importing and ingesting that file, as opposed to actually going out to the to the website and scraping. And sometimes that is a far more effective, easier, and less fragile approach to take. Also, I think hopefully what you've seen is, because I've brought it up so much time, is really the bulk of the work outside of the parse is really just going to be mapping data. Usually there's, once you get the parsing done, the first time you get the parsing done, particularly hitting outliers, can be a real pain. But after that, it tends to be, it's like, okay, I can get the data, it's just where do I need to put it? And so it becomes, mapping and making sure that the relationships are properly maintained. Formatting your data is going to be a critical piece. Otherwise, it's going to be really hard to generalize it. So for example, if you want to compare things that happen within a certain date range, you've got to have date formats that match so that you're able to do that apples to apples comparison of one date to another. Because of that, you think of the two key ends there is the parsers that are going to pull data in, and then the formatters that are really converting that data to your format. Those are going to be, invaluable tools to have. And those are going to be critical for you to be able to have something that gets the right data and spits it out in a way that's usable. And as I mentioned, whenever you're doing anything like this, start simple, go with like a single record or something like that. Some of the simplest kind of stuff. Make sure that you can do that, validate your process, and then repeat it for, either more records or for some of the more complicated record formats to try to make sure that you cover everything. That way you at least have a baseline that works. All right, questions and comments?
So it's kind of funny, Rob. One of the things that you were talking about, because I have to deal with screen scrapers a lot. And what exactly are you using Selenium for? Let's start with that one.
So for Selenium, I have used it a lot for scraping, where I'll go in, fire up Selenium, and I will record activity, and then turn around, and with that from Selenium, then you can do it's like a bunch of different. Let's see, do I have Selenium fired up here real quick? I don't know if I got it installed on this guy. Shoot, I don't think I have it.
So are you using it for the screen recording capabilities to get the IDs in that you need to get to where you're going, and then you just translate that into Python?
A lot of times, yeah. And actually, like, I use Python a lot but like Selenium will create it for you. Selenium will generate the script in Python or Java or PHP, whatever it is. There's a bunch of different languages that, basically what you do is you record yourself, you record your activity, and then tell it to generate the code to do that. And it will generate for you that, that PHP script or that Python script that does exactly what you just did. And that at least gives me basically it gives me a starting point, because sometimes it's not going to give like it'll use, like, say, XPath. Although usually that's gonna be pretty good. If it's using like the selector, CSS selector, then that may not work for all of the records that I want to do. And this, again, typically is because it's going to do it for, I'm going to do it for a single case. So for example, like that job site thing is I would record myself going to monster.com, select it, running a search, clicking on a job, and then want to be able to parse that job data and suck it into my system. And then I would take that and basically want to generalize it. So looking at what I've been given in the script, it's basically like it sort of kickstarts that process. So now I've got some of the basics of it built in, and then I can go in and I can, tweak the IDs and some of the navigational stuff in that. But it definitely speeds up the whole scraping process.
Okay, gotcha. So you're using it for the record playback feature, yeah, and the generation of the code. All right. Yeah, no, that makes sense. I was just curious. In that instance, that makes sense. I was just trying to figure out why you were using that versus just using Python, but that makes sense. So you basically build the script and then you modify the script, which is what we do for testing.
Yeah, as I basically get Selenium to write the Python code for me for the most part, and then I go back and make the adjustments as needed. Or at least here's the navigational part of that code anyways.
Right. So here's a kind of a odd observation from my nugget to what you're talking about. So have you considered possibly doing, could you do some of this with like those streams and batching processes where you write something that would essentially trigger a script or like for your RSS feed? So you could pull in the RSS feed through your stream, do that kind of scraping, formatting, and then just inject it into your system without having to go the other path.
What's the other path?
Where you have to actually write your own, take the, like, you have to write something to go hit the RSS feed. Whereas if you use the stream process, you just point it to that and say, okay, go consume this like every, day, every hour.
Yeah, you can. I mean, it's a different problem that you're solving in that case, because you can scrape and do it for a single source. Typically what you're doing is you're not just on the fly displaying that. You're usually, what you're doing is you're storing that information. You're doing some sort of doing something with that data. So it's not just that you're redisplaying, that you're like taking it and just reformatting it. What you're actually doing is you're taking it usually from multiple sources, and then you're converting that into something that some general format that then you're going to be kicking back out to each other. So like for the RSS feed, it would not be a single feed. You're actually going out to multiple feeds, and then you're probably, maybe you've got some additional data around that, like, hey, I've shown this to that person before, or some other additional data to it. It's not just that's a different problem set, or context is the idea of, okay, I've got a stream of data that I want to somehow display, maybe in a more user-friendly fashion, or that I'm going to do some basic processing with it, maybe do some lookups or something like that to give it some more context, but then just basically display that stream with just in a different context, is different from scraping and pulling the data in, and then now it's my data. Because when I scrape it, the idea, like streaming, it's really still not my data. I'm just tweaking the data as it gets displayed. With scraping, it's like, this is my data, or I'm getting all these sources and I'm going to make it my data. So I'm going to do some sort of value add that before I kick that back out to my users.
Okay, well, that kind of makes sense. But you could do a consumer that essentially does that with the stream as well. That's what we're doing where I'm at. We're taking in a lot of feeds, converting it, and putting it into our system, into our data. So that's why I was kind of curious.
Yeah. So in your case, I mean, that to me is more. Yeah. I mean, it would be in the general sense. In that case, it would be a scraping thing, but you're not in that case. But that's also where you're storing it. So you're not just redirecting that out. You're taking all of those disparate sources and converting them into your data warehouse or whatever it is, and then being able to combine those data pieces, and then send those back out to your users or to your systems in a consistent format.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, it was just kind of an interesting correlation. I never thought of it that way before until you presented this right after I talked about data streams.
Yeah, and it is like I didn't go into streams specifically because there's some other those are slightly different because there's a little more complexity in dealing with like a stream than just an RSS feed. But at the end of the day, there's definitely a lot of similarities between those. Let's see, other questions, comments?
Yeah, question. What is the use of scraping? Does it make the website faster, or you're just identifying abnormalities on the website?
For scripting and the scraping side of it?
Yeah.
It's to automate it. It's so that you're not having to go out and click and do stuff. So it's so that a program, it's allowing you to programmatically go out and surf a website and then grab pieces of data and do stuff with them.
So, okay, so what do you use that data for, like as a developer? Like, scraping is not scripting, isn't it?
I mean, you can use the data for just about anything. Like, for example, like healthcare, there are healthcare companies that will go out and scrape data, or in some way, form, or fashion. A lot of times it's they've got some sort of like feeds or streams that they're looking at, but then they're going to take that data and analyze it and kick it back out and say, hey, here's some current risks that are showing up in healthcare work that's being going on, or here's how we're seeing insurance claims being processed, or things like that. Is that there's a lot of different ways that you may utilize that data, and it's you saying, hey, I want to provide this service or this solution for my users, but it is more valuable if I have data outside of what I currently have. So I'm going to go out and scrape all of these other sources to pull that data in and provide, bigger bang for the buck to my customers.
Okay. All right. Got it. So it's kind of like collecting user data, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's collecting data of whatever it may be. So like a job site would be, like I said, maybe you want to create a job site that people come visit your site and be able to see what jobs are available.
Mhm.
Well, instead of you going out and data entering thousands of jobs and finding out where those jobs are, you can go build a bunch of scrapers that go out to various sites where that they publish jobs that are available, and then pull that information into your site.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
All right, other questions or comments? All right, so that brings us to the all important thank you. So appreciate the time sort of listening through this and just thinking about some of these things. It's a little different for what some people may have thought about scraping. So hopefully it's been useful to you. As always, if you have any questions or comments that come up after the presentation, as sometimes they do, you can shoot us an email at info@developernoir.com. We have a contact us form out at developernoir.com as well. You can follow us on Twitter at developernoir or DM us there. And then also we've got a Facebook page, Developernoir, out on Facebook. So we just appreciate doing this, appreciate your time as we just work together, try to make every developer better. Have a good day.